Good morning, live Garland Nixon with my very special guest and my good friend Ray Mcgovern. We got plenty to talk about today. We're going to start off with the big story, and that is President Xi Jinping and President Joe Biden had a bit of a discussion, and Ray's going to interpret for us. Let's chat. Good morning, and thanks everyone for joining us. And I'm going to ask everybody to share this to share this on all your social media platforms, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the little bell. Ray Mcgovern, let's get right to it. Xi Jinping and Joe Biden had a discussion. It seemed important to me, and Joe Biden seems to have gone full neocon. Your thoughts on it?
Garland, this is the most amazing thing that I've observed in many years, and I've been many years at it. It's been exactly a year since the foreign minister of Beijing and the national security advisor appeared in Anchorage to talk to, or more properly stated, to be talked down to by this young fella, Jake Sullivan, and this fellow named Tony Blinken. It was a disaster. The Chinese stood up and said, look, we're used to being talked down by imperialists. I mean, it's been centuries that we've gotten used to that, but that ain't the case no more. And in the famous words, they said, you don't have the qualifications to talk to us that way. That was a year ago. And what happened? Well, Blinken and Sullivan couldn't understand that. They're very well educated in the Ivies, and so they have this very superior, overweening attitude. And they told President Biden, look, don't worry about Russia. Russia's got a really big problem because Russia is being squeezed by China. Now, how do I know that? Well, I know that because when the two finally met, Biden and Putin, on the 16th of June last year, Biden, before he could get on the plane, they're dragging him on the plane. They said, no, that's enough joke. No. Well, he said, no, I probably shouldn't quote what went on here, but the Russians have this terrible problem about being squeezed by China. They have this long 1,000-mile border. And China, of course, wants to be not only the economic superpower, but the military. So we understand about the Russians. They're really being squeezed by China. Now, at that point, Putin and Xi said, I guess we have to give Biden, and to the degree his minions are educable, we need to give them a kind of history lesson and a kind of today lesson because we are together on this. And long story short, at a summit meeting, a virtual summit in December, the Russians and the Chinese said, we have the kind of strategic relationship that exceeds an alliance. And in February, when Putin went to Beijing to launch the Olympics, they agreed on a very important statement, which says there's no limit. There's no upper limit to our cooperation. There's nothing that we can't discuss or bring together. That was the 4th of February. The 24th of February, Putin invades Ukraine. And I have to say, I don't like that. I don't agree with that. But I have to tell the rest of the story. Was it unprovoked? No way was it unprovoked. It took me back to 2014 when people were saying, Putin planned this invasion of Crimea and then he did it. Well, that's not the case at all. He had no idea. There's not a scintilla of evidence that Putin was planning this taking over of Crimea before the U.S. and other Western services arranged the coup d'etat in Kiev, and that was on the 22nd February 2014. So what we're saying here is that the Western media would make it out to believe, or like people to believe, that European history starts on the 23rd of February, but Putin all along had this idea of seizing Crimea. It's BS. And what's really discouraging here is that you don't get an accurate account of all this, and nobody even mentions China. I'll just read this very briefly. The New York Times. Now, Washington, for obvious reasons, given the fiasco that happened yesterday on this 2-hour call with President Xi and Biden, the Washington's been very sparse with the information, but the Chinese immediately gave the readout. Now, this is the way the New York Times played it an hour later. The Chinese leader expressed opposition to the broad sanctions. Well, hello. Of course he did. And this is a really, really important thing. If the Chinese are opposing the sanctions, then they have a lifeline that they offer to Russia. Now, here goes. Xi warned that not only could this trigger collapse of the global economy, but then he said, quote, "Let he who tied the bell on the tiger take it off," end quote. And then the Times is very, very understanding. It translates what that means to us for anyone that doesn't get it. It says, and it's an idiom that's used before to convey the responsibility for solving a problem should fall on the person who created the problem. Well, and then finally, also naively, Mr. Xi did not suggest that China could play a role in ending the war. Well, of course not. So why did Biden, on the suggestion of Blinken, and I had a piece I was writing before I fell asleep last night, it was Biden blinded by Blinken. Blinken talked to his opposite number in China for a long time, 7 hours, I think somebody said, in Rome just a week ago. And for him to come back and say, you ought to talk to Xi because this foreign minister doesn't get it. Xi says, look, Biden asked for this call, and this is what I told him. Let those who are responsible for this fix it. Now, again, it's awful that this has come into the past that it has, with an invasion and people getting killed. But to stress, as some of my good friends are saying, for example, to say that Putin's real desire is to have a monument for himself in Moscow that says on the bottom, I'm greater than Peter the Great or Catherine the Great. I'm Putin the Great. Give me a break. That's not what he wants. All he wants is to live in peace and security, and he can't do that if NATO bases are arranged or aligned on his western border. That's what it's all about. It's not.
Well, let me ask you this, Ray. Isn't
Yeah.
that, there's two things. Do the neocons, have they really created this alternate universe that they really believe? Or is that simply propaganda for the Western world, or some combination of both? What do you think?
Well, it's really hard to know. Russian studies and an appreciation of what drives Russia today in view of its history, the fact that Russia was born in Kiev, that the Russian didn't even have an alphabet until the 9th century. Can you believe it? And 2 Greek priests went up and manufactured an alphabet for them. Now, the Russians were behind. And, obviously, when we were coming out of the Middle Ages, from the Dark Ages, and going into the Renaissance, the Russians were just coming out of 240 years of rule by the Tatars, Genghis Khan and his folks, okay? So it was Ivan the Terrible, curiously enough, Ivan the Fourth, who extended Russia's rule down to almost Crimea, where Catherine the Great incorporated Crimea. That was the first time they were united. What happened then? The Swedes came in. The Lithuanians came in, the Poles came in, and then later, of course, Napoleon came in and Hitler came in. I mean, the Russians know this. They all study it in history. And so it's no surprise that Putin enjoys about a 70% approval rating in Russia, despite what you read in the New York Times.
And so let me ask you the other thing I do. We've got about 8 minutes or so left, and I think it's important. You had mentioned that you had a concern that there could be some kind of a biological or chemical false flag in Ukraine. Maybe you could let us know, what that concern is, where it springs from.
Well, Golan, I'm really glad you raised that subject. I'm very concerned that there will be a false flag Russian attack with chemical warfare. Now, why am I concerned about that? Well, at the UN yesterday, the Russians revealed what they know about the chemical research labs that dotted Ukraine and other countries, some of which were hard up against the Russian border, some of which were studying birds and all kinds of bugs, birds that migrate east, Russia, and some birds that were sort of programmed to take into account Slavic, read Russian chromosomes or whatever. Okay, now that was revealed, and the U.S. needs to divert attention from that. What better way than to accuse Putin of using chemicals? Now we have Blinken, we have the head of this Secretary General of NATO. We have all kinds of very high-level people saying, beware, the Russians are going to attack with chemicals. Do they need to? No. Do the chemical agents change the landscape on a land war? No, they don't. Is there precedent for accusing a hostile nation, hostile in the eyes of the United States, of this kind of provocation? Yes, there is. And it's been completely documented using the principles of physics, which can't be bended, okay, that those Syrian chemical attacks were done by, well, let's put them moderate rebels that we funded and that our Western intelligence services provided the precursor chemicals for. That's 3 times in Syria. Once it almost got us into an open war on Syria. The Russians bailed Obama out on that. So there's precedent for a chemical attack. Every American is being exposed to how the Russians are taking it on the chin. The Russians are losing, they're getting battered, which is not true. And so they're preconditions to believe, the Russians are desperate. There's going to be a chemical attack described by Blinken and the other people. I don't think the head of the Defense Department is going to be involved in this charade. But I think it more likely than not that in the next couple of days, before Biden goes to the NATO summit next week, that there'll be charges of a chemical attack by Russia. And who will do it? Well, the defense secretary in Russia said at the end of December that there were 120 Americans, volunteers or contractors is what he said, and they were very close to chemical agents, and that he was afraid that this might mean trouble. So if they're already in place, the head of the Defense Department in Russia has already warned about this, but nobody will take that into account. All they'll watch is BSNBC and CNN.
Well, Ray, and the thing I recall about Syria is this: they don't even need any chemicals. In Syria, they just, when you look at the reports, the OPCW reports, they just kind of spread some rockets around, and they made a claim, and the actual tests found like chlorine, which is bleach. They like most anywhere you can go around in a city and test, and you can find chlorine or some kind of a disinfectant that people use. So basically, they don't even have to make the accusation. They don't even need a chemical. They just simply maybe lay some buckets or something around, lay something around, and just say, there you go. There's the chemical attack. And the New York Times and the Washington Post, and of course, we already know Jen Stoltenberg et al. Will all scream, we knew it was coming.
You know, Garland, it's even worse than that, because the UN has the Organization for the Prevention of Chemical Warfare, okay? And they are totally corrupted. They are totally corrupted by the West, and that has been demonstrated by the principle of physics, by people like Ted Postel, by people like Aaron Atte, and people who look at this thing closely and are not subjected to BSNBC or CNN.
Oh, yes. And while we're waiting for our next guest, another question, I guess, and that is your thoughts. We probably got a few minutes. Your thoughts on the Assange, the latest Assange findings. We got about a minute or two, and we'll go to Netfa.
Well, this is painful to address. He happens to be a friend. I think that this is probably the worst single thing that happened last year. The British make a mockery of jurisprudence. So keep them running, keep them in prison, keep them out of. Show everyone by the harsh treatment of Julian Assange what happens to you if you reveal U.S. war crimes, which of course Julian did.
Thanks a lot, Ray. Certainly appreciate you taking your time out on a Saturday morning, and look forward to talking to you again soon.
You're most welcome, Colin.
All right, Ray Mcgovern. Next, Netfa Freeman. Netfa, before we get started, tell people where they can find you online and your your show, etc.
Wow. Okay, so find me online. I'm on Twitter, Netfa Free. Just take off the A and the man on my name, and make sure to spell it right, everybody. And versus those, so it's NETFA, and then free. That's Twitter, and I'm on Facebook. It's easy to find. I'm probably the only Netfa Freeman on Facebook. The radio show, I have a radio show on WPFW Pacifica's DC station. It comes on, it's called Voices with Vision, comes on 9 a.m. To 10 a.m. Eastern time. Member of Black Alliance for Peace and Pan-African Community Action, which has, social media too that you can look up easily.
So let's get started, Ray. Let's get started, Netfa. One of the things that I think is interesting, and that is that one of the tropes that we've heard is, and Joe Biden said really early, and I know it works because I had a friend say it to me. When it comes to Ukraine, the entire world is supporting the United States against Russia. And I saw on Moodham, Alabama, I saw this map, and the map showed in blue, it had the countries that A, had closed their airspace to Russia, and B, supported the sanctions. And then in no color was the countries that didn't go along with the U.S. Africa, the Middle East, China, India. China and India alone is what? Close to 3 billion people in a country of in a world of 7 billion people. So China, India, all of the former Soviet republics, all of Africa, all of the Middle East, Central America, the Caribbean, South America. It was obvious that the most of the world doesn't go along with the U.S. And I saw another one that said of 9 of the 10 most populous nations on earth are not going along with the U.S. when it comes to Ukraine. What are your thoughts on why this is and the dynamics?
So the best way to understand this is to understand or to return back to what the U.S. means, or even Western European leadership means when they say international community. When they use international community, they're not talking about what we would think, the rest of the world, regular people, all the governments. They're talking about Western leadership, like governments of Western countries. And that's it. They don't mean anything else, and so it does, and it's important for us to recognize the difference between the leadership of Western governments and the populations of Western governments, because we often don't know what they what they want or what they feel about things, and they're often bombarded like the United States. I mean, it's clear the United States is bombarded with all kinds of propaganda to influence people's minds without any kind of complexity or historical or any kind of context. And it's just like it's branding. They actually hire PR firms to get people in on different things. The Ukrainian government has hired PR firms to help with this quote unquote war effort. And so even so people can be often confused about that. But then back to the real part of your question is why all these other governments are not counted, and excuse me, why are they also not clearly not in support of this? And the reason is simple. One of the major things that you even hear the United States talk about, you have to kind of read through the lines sometimes they're blatant about it, but they're concerned with a multipolar world now. And they're concerned that their policy of the stated policy of full spectrum dominance is waning in Africa. And this reason why there's AFRICOM, the U.S. Africa Command, and all these command centers around the world, Eurocom, Indo-Pacific Com, and Southcom, and all these. And we didn't mention South America because we should have mentioned South America and the countries that have not supported this effort. That they have a different relationship to Russia. They have a different relationship to China than the Western countries have, than the NATO countries have. These countries, the NATO countries, are the former colonizers of most of the world. The United States, likes to say, or likes to put out that it was not a colonizer, so to speak, the direct or more formal colonialism. However, it is a neocolonizer. It is the top neocolonizer of the world. And when we say what that means is that all of the trappings of independence can be, set upon or be the outward character or nature or vision or perspective about countries, but all of their economy, their politics, even their culture and social things are controlled by outside, by the United States predominantly. And this includes institutions that control. Now, Russia and China don't really dominate the institutions that people take for granted or think of as benevolent, like the World Trade Organization, the WTO, the World Bank, and the IMF. These are the institutions that facilitate what is known as neocolonialism. And then even the fact that there are operations, the CIA dirty tricks that make sure that there are coups d'etats and there's leaders that are amenable to the policies and the interest of U.S. interests. The United States is like, I don't know if it's the only country I can think of that when they talk about our interests, our strategic interests somewhere, they can be talking about some places 9,000 miles away from the shores of the United States, and as if these other countries who are within this, don't have their own interests that are separate and apart and distinct from the United States. I mean, they can actually be right up on the border or in meddling in some country and not really abide by the interest of the people inside that country, whether it be the leadership. Africa, and I think you mentioned mostly the Middle East and the African countries, when it comes to dealing with Russia or China versus the United States levels, structural adjustment programs and uses aid as a weapon and all these types of things. They even these military is all over the place, so it's actually can strong arm countries into doing its bidding. But with China and Russia, the relationships between those countries, the leadership, and that's why we can even see the separation between leadership in Africa, what we call a comprador class, and the masses of the people. But even that comprador class in Africa knows the difference between when they deal with Russia and when they deal with the gangsterism of the United States. It's straight up gangsterism how the United States does things. But with Russia and China, it's bilateral relationships. Take, for example, and then we'll just take, for example, the Mali. Mali right now is going on a serious, like a groundswell of anti-French, anti-Western colonialism. It's mostly focused on French because that was the former colonizer. And the French have a large military presence in a lot of Africa, second to the United States. And Mali is one of them where their colonizers are. I mean, where their, military is, same difference, but the Mali has gotten the French to agree to get out the withdrawal French troops from Africa. from Mali. And one of the reasons is they were, all of these troops are there under ostensibly under the for the purpose of fighting extremism, terrorist extremism and whatnot. But they've been failing. In fact, they've aggravated the terrorism. The Wagner Group, which is a private military contractor, basically mercenaries, they asked for the Russians to come in. This is the reason why they forced the French out, or getting them to, there's such an anti-French, is because they got criticized for doing business with Russia and for bringing the Wagner up, and then actually maligned and, all kind of craziness they were saying, and even, sort of veiled threats. So they said, okay, that's how you feel? Well, you can leave. That was basically it. Now, with Mali, they're looking at the role that the Wagner Group and the Russians even played in places like Syria, where they're actually able to fight and deter the extremism against the government there. So there's reasons why, but the United States doesn't think about those things. And so anyway, that's a long answer to why, and that's just one reason why many of the governments are not just going to go along with the different trade agreements and things like that they have solid interest. And then, not to mention colonialism and the role that the relationship with Russia during the independence movements was different. The Soviet Union at the time, which is not the Soviet Union anymore, but still there's long-standing relationships that still make a difference and have something. The United States, on the other hand, and I'll wrap up the last for this question, on the other hand, during the independence movements, played the opposite role. We're always trying to support the colonialism and the Southern African states in South Africa, and Zimbabwe and Namibia. The CIA in Angola, they're supporting. The CIA was organizing support for the South African armies that were trying to keep the settler colonialism and apartheid in these countries. And so, it's a completely different history, and they take it for granted that people don't look at these things.
A couple of things that I'd like to throw at you, and that is, I think that we've seen kind of the mask off for Europe and the U.S. in that we've seen the disparate treatment of people in Ukraine who were Indian. I know India was very angry because Indian students were mistreated in Ukraine, African students, Muslims, anyone who wasn't, it was kind of Aryan was treated very bad. And in some places we understand that some of them might have been killed, tortured, refused entrance to trains and mistreated at the border, even in Poland. And and the U.S. was supporting the groups, neo-Nazi groups, etc. The U.S. government didn't speak up, didn't put out any opposition towards this. I truly believe, particularly in hearing some of the responses I've had from some of my Muslim friends and seeing the cold shoulder now coming from Middle East leaders, that I've never seen the cold shoulder like this coming towards the U.S. I think that those kind of events have had an effect on U.S. relationship with, particularly, as I said, the Middle East, when I see the people who are in charge of some of the OPEC countries. And your thoughts on the neo-Nazis and the neo-Nazism and the racism that's demonstrated in Ukraine, and the fact that the U.S. doesn't say a word about it.
All right. It's such a bizarre situation, and it's another thing that the world can see. Also, that they try to cover up these things, the relationship of the neo-Nazis in Ukraine, or of the government, the Kyiv government. And I know that Ray McGovern covered a lot of that, and also the provocations of to Russia around the issue of Ukraine. But a lot of people are not as uninformed in the United States, and so. And so people can see this. The rest of the world, contrary to popular belief, most of the world is non-white, and so neo-Nazis don't really fare well into the the affections or whatever or the affinities of the rest of the world, right?
And if I may add one quick thing, and even in America, the majority of, the white population wouldn't approve of it, so much so that the U.S. has to use propaganda to try to pretend as though they're not supporting Nazis, because their own people would say, hey, we're not down with that.
Right. They're not, their own people would say we're not down with, and it's the same with other countries too, European countries. The people generally, and I believe this, if you give people enough informed information, the masses of people, enough of a complete context and informed information, they're going to opt for what's just. And I think that's the, most of the times if we don't see it in any places, because there's confusion, and there's political confusion that serves the interests of the elite. And so so then we're talking about, if to go back to the question, and some of the there's a lot of double standards and racism, really white supremacy, on the part of the power structure, the power elite in the United States. One, regarding the support for the neo-Nazis, you get a lot of this trying to reduce white supremacy by the Democrats in particular to, people like the likes of those who would support Donald Trump. That's what white supremacy is, as opposed to white supremacy actually being the structure or the system of settler colonialism that has brought and enslaved Africans here and stolen the land from indigenous people, and those people still having the same relationship to the system in the country that's persisting in terms of us being, the lowest on the totem pole with things, facing police repression and mass incarceration and disregard. Then when you look at the immigration issues, which a lot of the Western countries, Western Europe, are having immigration issues largely because of their neoliberal trade policy or neoliberal economic policies toward other countries, and also the repression the wars and things that they start, and just destabilization that they start. So then people migrate to where they think it's going to be better. And how they're being treated is in stark contrast to how Ukrainians are being treated in this whole thing. And one, again, them knowing that this was a situation that they caused. And look at Haiti. So there's the Africans and non-white population, I should say non-white population in Ukraine, that's trying to get out and trying to go to places like Poland, and people are seeing how they're treated. And even the United States is saying something about like being on the African governments to do something about that, right? But they don't do anything about it. They can't even say anything. They don't, or they, not that they can't, they won't say anything to like Poland or Ukraine about this treatment. There's that. And then there's also the treatment that they also put, the double standard they also do themselves. If you have immigrants from like Haiti, for example, or from Africa that try to get to the United States, they're not welcomed with open arms, as you quote unquote Biden said about the Ukraine. In fact, it's the opposite. Say, don't come here. Remember, they had Kamala Harris, don't come here. So people can see these type of these blatant double standards, and
I have an important question for you. The Democrats run around with these rainbow flags and Black Lives Matter masks and all that kind of stuff, right? But when I see these people, they're on CNN saying, well, these poor Ukrainians, they're like us. Blonde hair, blue eyes, they're Christian. They're implying that, look, when the brown and Muslim countries get bombed, yeah, we're all right with that. It doesn't, here's the way it comes across. It doesn't tug at our heartstrings when these brown and Muslim countries get bombed, A, because we're bombing them, but B, now these are blonde hair, blue eyes. And what's important is they say, well, it's the Trump people that are a bunch of racists. It's the Fox, it's all of that. This is on CNN. This is on BBC. Right. This is on the so-called Black Lives Matter liberal a rainbow flag. We're here for everybody. But now the mask is off, and the so-called liberals are the ones that are showing that when it comes to the fact of that, when it comes to the issue of life and death, and bombing countries, they could care less about the brown countries. It comes down to race to them, even though they claim it doesn't. Your thoughts?
And it has to. I mean, there would be no other way. Even before this happened, this is kind of exposing what's been there all along. So even before this happened, we're not seeing this. We don't hear about the conditions or the situations that caused the destabilization of Haiti. It's almost just accepted as, oh, those are just some African Black people that can't get it together, and it's just poor Haiti and all that kind of stuff. That's how it's done. You don't hear about the support of of these dictators by the United States and the core group that's made up of all these European countries plus the United Nations and the OAS, and you don't hear about all that. The fact that Jovenel, the assassinated president, was extended past his term of office constitutionally and supported by the United States to do so. That right now the leadership of hate was handpicked by leadership in the United States and the core group. You don't hear about any of those things. So the people who are doing the media now, that means what it's saying is that there's still this underlining white supremacy and attitude and assumptions and worldview that they have, that they even take for granted. They don't even know they really have it until they're faced with something as contradictory as that exposes the contradiction, like the Ukraine situation. And so everything is posed, the foreign policies and what happens in other countries is posed as those countries have issues and the United States is trying to free them and help them from these issues. And so when something like this pulls the lid off of it, then we get them actually saying what they really feel or exposing their ignorance and their racism.
One last question. We got Caleb Maupin coming up next, but there's an important question. If we can take 1 or 2 minutes that I want to ask you. The Congressional Black Caucus, the so-called black, as Margaret Kimberly always says, the black misleadership class. John Conyers, who I knew, who I thought was a really good man, had passed a legislation to actually stop sending, literally, he had an act to stop sending aid to neo-Nazis in Ukraine after he passed away. They're overriding and now doing that. But the bottom line is this: where is the Black Caucus? They're supposed to be standing up. What can we, they're Democrats, they're the Black Caucus. They claim to be black leadership. And when it comes to these issues, radio silence. We got, say, 1 to 2 minutes.
The Black Caucus hasn't served the interests of regular people for a long time, particularly not black people, and that they really, everything else is show. They talk a good game, but everything else is show. They've long been, it used to be considered the conscience of the Congress,
Right.
but that's a long time gone. So now they're bought and sold just like every other congressperson, and they're there to put window dressing on the U.S. government as something that's multiracial and not racist anymore. Has been in the past, but right now, you even have all kinds of people, even some that are old guard that consider progressive, like Maxine Waters and even Barbara Lee, spouting this Ukraine stuff. When the U.S. puts on their propaganda in their media, and it's made clear that anyone who opposes that is political suicide for them, they fall right in line just like everybody else. For them, it's more important to keep their positions. They think their positions mean something than it is to stand up on principles. Our freedom fighters, they put their lives on the line. What is their career? What are they protecting here when they're protecting their career? When we have people like Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and others, they put their lives on the line for the people. They need to, go back, revisit that page in the books.
Netfa Freeman, where can people find you online?
On Twitter at Netfa Free, NETFA Free. I'm on Facebook. Black Alliance for Peace. Check out not just me, but Black Alliance for Peace and Pan African Community Action. PACApower.org is our website. blackallianceforpeace.com is the website for.
Oh yes, I love all the black. I'm a big fan of the Black Alliance for Peace and all the people, the Ajamu Baraka and Julie Varghese and Margaret Kimberly. I think I'm the world president, unofficial, de facto of the Margaret Kimberly fan club.
Right.
Thanks a lot, Netfa Freeman. Look forward to having you on again.
All right.
Thank you. All right, and next, oh my gosh, my dear friend and a great fighter for the working people, the one and only Caleb Maupin. Caleb, oh wait a minute, Caleb, we got to get you straight here because we have to make sure we've got. There we go, at Caleb Maupin, so people know where to find. We got plenty to talk about, Caleb, but let's start here. Talk about what your projects are and what you're working on, where people can find it.
Sure. Well, I'm involved in building the Center for Political Innovation. That's cpiusa.org. We are a think tank dedicated to envisioning a future in the United States beyond capitalism. We just had a great conference in Austin, Texas, very well attended. The image of that conference has gone viral. We have factorfiction.com or one of these fact-checking agencies trying to determine whether or not it actually happened, just because they have the image of, we had the flag of the Donetsk People's Republic. We had the Z, which is kind of the meme, the symbol of Russia's intervention in Ukraine, as well as the American flag and the old Soviet flag in our opening ceremony, and it's created quite a stir. So the videos are starting to come out. We took a while to edit, make sure we got everything right. We had multiple cameras there, but it's created quite a stir. We're anti-imperialists, and we're here to say that the enemy of America's working families is not in Iran, it's not in Venezuela, it's not in Russia, it's not in China, it's not in Cuba. The enemy of America's working families is on Wall Street, it's in the Pentagon, and it's in the London Stock Exchange. And it's time that working families of the United States from different strata of this society come together around an economic program to rescue the country.
If I may add one place, Silicon Valley.
Oh, that too. Yeah.
Let's not forget that they're looking at figuring out how they can toss us off right now. At any rate, so let's start here. And your position in America today is controversial, and that is that the Ukraine conflict is a result of American world hegemony, and that certainly, as do I, any anti-imperialist, any person that is against war. To me, if you're against war, you have to be against empire if you understand what empire is. The people that I know who are against war, who don't come out and say I oppose empire, generally don't know what it is. So let's start here. For people who say, well, you're an anti-imperialist, you're opposed to empire, and therefore you're looking at this Ukraine crisis differently. What the heck is empire? How can people understand what that is and why they should oppose it?
Sure. Well, I understand imperialism as an economic system. Lenin wrote a very good book called Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism. And he laid out the 5 aspects of imperialism. But basically, imperialism is when the world is dominated by banks and corporations, cartels, trusts, and syndicates based in Western countries. Based in Western countries, you have these big international corporations tied to big banks, tied to monopolies in manufacturing, etc. They dominate the world economy, and the way they dominate it is by holding back economic development. You can talk about how the British Empire, when they went to India, they had all these textile looms, the people of India. Well, they burned them all down, and they forced the people of India to import their cloth from Britain. You can talk about how the people of Mexico, they've been growing their own food since before Christopher Columbus showed up. But now, because of NAFTA, Mexican farmers have been put out of business, and they import most of their food from the United States. The same has been done in Haiti. And that basically keeping countries in poverty, rolling back and holding back development in order to maintain a monopoly by big corporations. That's the defining aspect of imperialism. It's about keeping the world poor so that Wall Street and London can stay rich. And right now, it's about making the first world and the United States and Western Europe poorer. In this high-tech, global, low-wage economy, they really don't need the American industrial working class like they once did. And that's why all throughout the United States, in Pittsburgh and in Michigan and in places where you once had a prosperous middle class, we see neighborhoods filled with empty, foreclosed homes. And we're seeing the living standards drop. The life expectancy of the United States has gone down by, I think, almost 2 years over the past 2-3 years. We've seen a decrease in our life expectancy here in the United States. Conditions are getting worse. We've got a system of prisons for profit, making big corporations wealthy by locking people away. We've got an opioid epidemic because these big corporations push doctors to overprescribe opioid medications, a crisis of opioid addiction all throughout the heartland of America. Conditions are getting worse, but big corporations are getting wealthy, and this is imperialism, a global system. And Russia, they were dominated by that system in the 1990s. In the 1990s, after the fall of the Soviet Union, Boris Yeltsin was Bill Clinton's buddy, and they went in there and wrecked the economy. But that started changing in 1999 when Putin came into office. He restructured their economy to be centered around government-controlled oil and gas exports. And now Russia is back in business, and they are a competitor, and they are selling oil and gas on the international markets in competition with Wall Street. They are the top exporter of grain and wheat around the world because Putin rebuilt their farming sector with state revenue from oil and gas. And now Wall Street wants to put Russia out of business, and they want to defeat Russia. They don't want to have a competitor. And that's why in 2014, they overthrew the government in Kiev and installed a fanatically anti-Russian government. And that's why they have not implemented the Minsk agreements, and they've let this government and enabled this fanatically anti-Russian government to keep bombing and shelling and attacking the people of the eastern regions of Ukraine. And instead of integrating them back into Ukrainian society like they're supposed to do under the Minsk Accords, they've just kept bombing and shelling and attacking them. That's why the USA has been piling weapons into this government in Kiev. It's full of fanatics and extremists and others, and they've been piling weapons in there. And these bio labs have been set up. Oh, are we allowed to say that on YouTube? I don't know if we're allowed to talk about these bio labs, even though U.S. officials like Victoria Nuland admit they exist. And that is why now we have a situation where Russia is finally, after 8 years of shelling and bombing, 14,000 of these Russian-speaking people in the eastern regions dead. Some people say the numbers may be even as high as 16,000. Russia is moving in to protect the Donetsk People's Republic, protect the Lugansk People's Republic, and break apart the Ukrainian military that has been threatening them on their border for so long. And I hope that this can be ended quickly. I want there to be negotiations. I'm hoping that this can end very quickly. I think the strategy right now of the United States is they want to make this a prolonged conflict, keep Russia there for a long time, the new Afghanistan. But I think that at this point, Russia, I think they're making the right decision. I think that that this is what they have been compelled to do by the situation the United States has put them in, and it's necessary for them to move in and take this action. I don't think they're in the wrong in doing this. Now, obviously, I don't support any loss of life, any killing of civilians. But a lot of the stories we're hearing are just debunked. I mean, this claim that Russia bombed a theater. Well, for 3 days beforehand, Russia was saying very loudly, and in Donetsk news, they were saying, we have the Ukrainians, they're rounding up a bunch of people and they're putting them in this theater and they're going to blow them all up as a false flag. They're going to blame Russia for it. They were beating the drum and saying this was going to happen. And then it happened, and Russia made clear they didn't have any airstrikes in the area. I mean, there are many examples of this. They were claiming Russia was attacking a power plant. Russia wasn't attacking a power plant. They were guarding the power plant, and Ukrainians shot at them. They shot back, and then as the Ukrainians were fleeing, they lit a fire, and then the fire department came and put it out. The idea that Russia was attacking a power plant, that didn't happen. So much fake news has come out since the beginning of this crisis in the last few weeks. I mean, we've seen just so much fake news. I mean, they have videos from Libya, videos from Syria, they say, or from Ukraine. They've been using video from video games. I mean, it's just so ridiculous. They have lied over and over and over again. And while they're lying, they're trying to silence people like you and me, Garland, who are saying the other side of the story. So if someone is telling you lie after lie after lie, and then they're working hard to make sure that you don't hear someone with the other perspective and the other view, would you trust that person? I wouldn't. And it looks to me like the West and Western capitalism and NATO are in the wrong here, and Russia is in the right.
So let me ask you this. One of the things that we talk about when we talk about, and the empires and the neocolonialism going around the world and acting in a way that, you go to a country and you need resources from the country, but rather than, and this is, let's be frank, what we see China and Russia striking a deal where it's a business deal. It's a bilateral deal. And we see the U.S. going in and their partners and taking advantage of the people and making the people suffer, overthrowing their governments and not acting in the best interest of the people of the country broadly. Okay. And I'm not saying that China or Russia are acting in the best interest. I'm saying they're doing a business deal. This is about making money and we can walk away, but we're not going to interfere. Their perspective is they're not kind of change the social and cultural and economic makeup of the country. Okay. Recently, the United States and Europe has enacted a number of sanctions against Russia. My point in that is not only did the U.S. leadership and the Western leadership not act in the best interest of the other countries, now they're not acting in the best interest of the people of their own countries. To me, I put it like kind of the analogy, kind of a Moby Dick metaphor, where Joe Biden and his people are Captain Ahab, and they're after this white whale of Putin and the Russians, and they're like, we'll get them no matter what, and we're on the ship. And now they're doing these sanctions that the many international observers and economists are looking at the sanctions saying they are already starting to have significant effects. And in the medium to long run, these sanctions of our leaders are going to have calamitous economic effects on the people of the United States. And even worse, and this is the way I put it, the US can grow its own food. The US can create its own energy. The US can maybe won't be happy, maybe make it through this if it doesn't fall apart completely. Europe is toast. They can't do any of it. So the other side of it is the leaders of these imperial countries taking actions that are not in the best interest of their own people. And that's where I guess you come in and people like me come in that say, we've got to let these Democrat, Republican crap go. They're now no longer acting in our best interest. They're acting to our detriment. Caleb.
Sure. Well, great example would be to look at the price of food right now. I mean, the price of milk, the price of eggs, the price of any product you're going to find that's a food product is rising. And there's a reason for that. And it's not because of Putin. It's because of the policies of the United States, which are compounding this, right? At this point, we have the Biden administration saying that their goal is to reduce global food output. They're actually talking about this. They've written documents about this. And we have a situation where, if you look at what's going on with Russia, Russia's a leading exporter at this point of what you can, of fertilizer. And there's going to be a number of countries that won't get fertilizer from Russia because of these sanctions that Joe Biden has put on Russia. Brazil was speaking up at the UN and saying, it's the Bolsonaro government. They're not, fans of Russia. They're not anti-imperialists, but they have a lot of farms in Brazil that are not going to get the fertilizer they need. And there's going to be a lot of countries in Africa that are not going to get the fertilizer they need to grow their crops. And we're facing a situation where we already have a lot of food shortages in the world. I mean, since the beginning of this pandemic, the malnutrition related deaths in Africa have significantly increased, the supply chain issues, et cetera. And now we have the Biden administration cutting off one of the key suppliers of fertilizer. Crops are not going to get fertilized. People are going to die as a result of these sanctions. And Joe Biden seems to have no problem with this. And he did this in Afghanistan, right? We froze Afghanistan's funds, right, as the United States was pulling out of Afghanistan. All the bank accounts of the Afghan government were frozen. There was a food crisis in the country, and especially cold winter. People were cold, and then Biden announced that he was giving the money to the 9/11 victims, even though the Afghan people had nothing to do with 9/11. 9/11 was carried out by a Saudi, according to the official story. Osama bin Laden was a Saudi. So the Afghan people were starving, and then we have a situation now where Biden's cutting off the global supply of fertilizer. We're going to have more food shortages, and on top of that, here in the United States, at this point, they're talking about reducing the agricultural output here, and they call it an environmental policy. They want to reforest or and reduce the output of American farmers. I mean, what in the world is going on? And so, of course, if you create scarcity, the price of food is going to go up. And so America's working families, they go to the supermarket to buy their food, and they get hit with bigger and bigger prices. Meanwhile, let's remember that when Biden was vice president under Obama, they were the only administration in history to reduce food stamps. Did you know that? They were the only administration to actually cut food stamps, food assistance. Because at that point, there were record numbers of people on food stamps coming out of the financial crisis. And so the Biden administration, the Obama administration with Joe Biden as vice, they reduced food assistance to low-income families. So we have a situation where I mean, it seems like starvation is the policy of the White House. I mean, this is what they intend to do, and it's shocking. I mean, you want to talk about the humanitarian consequences of this. I mean, why would you be trying to reduce agricultural output in this kind of situation? But apparently there are documents going all the way back to the Carter administration and their Global 2000 report where that has been the aim, to reduce the global food output, which is like horrifying. But this is Malthusianism, right? This is, the principle of population growth, overpopulation, et cetera. I mean, they really do believe there are just too many people in the world, and we gotta reduce the human population. It's really, really horrifying. Whereas China seems to have real solutions here. When you talk about climate change, there is a real issue, obviously. I think climate change is a fact. Man-made climate change is a reality. But the solution is not reducing the population and reducing consumption. And the solution is not windmills and solar panels, though I like windmills and solar panels. Nothing wrong with them, but they're not going to get us out of the crisis we're in. The answer is fusion energy. The answer is getting beyond fossil fuels. And Russia's president, Vladimir Putin, has called for a global united effort to get fusion energy, get beyond oil and gas and fossil fuels, get us to a higher mode of energy. And China is doing it. I mean, look at the details of what they're doing with their fusion energy program. They are speeding ahead, getting us toward a higher source of energy to get us beyond fossil fuels, to get us to a situation where we don't have the problems of climate change from burning fossil fuels, where we can actually supply the world with the energy it needs. That's what China's doing. Meanwhile, it seems like the only answer coming from the Western capitalists and corporations is everyone needs to have less. We need to have less people in the world. It's basically, think about a game of King of the Mountain. And, basically one kid gets to the top and then he announces, the game over. I'm at the top. That's what the big oil companies based in the West are doing. Wall Street is oil street, basically. You've got Exxon Mobil, that's Chase Bank. You've got HSBC Bank, that's basically BP. And they dominate the world's oil markets. And so their solution is, we're going to stay on oil, but everyone's just going to have less. And we're going to reduce oil output. We're going to reduce consumption, and everyone's going to have less. And we're going to stay with them at the center of the global economy. They dominate the oil markets, and that's how it's going to be. Well, I think humanity is going to keep marching ahead, and they're going to do it with fusion energy. They're going to do it with technological breakthroughs. And it's very, very scary to see them, carry out this kind of, sinister Malthusian agenda to try and keep themselves at the top of the world.
Well, if I could throw a couple things at you, because one of the things you said is technology, and a lot of people are scared to death of nuclear power. But here's the thing about it. One of the things you said was technology. Two things, because I do a lot of reading and researching. China, I do know they did this program. Two things that they did. And the one was they were going to the dark side of the moon to get helium-3. Because then you can produce basically fusion energy, and afterwards you don't have anything left over. So you now have the equivalent of a kind of a nuclear power program, and you don't have all of these spent fuel rods afterwards, and you don't have the issue of nuclear waste, number one. Number two, they had another interesting program that I thought was beautiful. And this I love. It was, I'm going to simplify it because technologically I don't understand it, but it was similar to this. I'll put it like this. Think of it like this. You know how you take like a, what do you call it? The old, when you were a kid, they called it a spyglass, the little round thing for that magnifying glass. It was the equivalent of, you put a magnifying glass in orbit, right? And that takes the sun energy and magnifies it in great power, then it creates that heat and creates the energy in orbit. And then in the same way that, you know how you can, they have now a way to like charge a cell phone by sending the electricity through the air, the power through the air. So you create the energy in outer space, and then you send it to Earth in kind of like sending the powered electrons through. So basically it's like a wireless charging station that you put in orbit. You have this where it's before the Earth's atmosphere, so it's getting everything from the sun. It creates the energy there, and then it kind of sends like a wireless charging beam down to Earth. So here's what I'm saying. It's what you're saying. They're exploring unique technology to say, let's not limit ourselves. Even this, let's not limit ourselves to the horizons that we have for power. We may find a new technology for power. You've got tides, you've got all kinds of things, hydroelectric, using the heat from the earth, where you drill down and use that heat. So technologically speaking, we've got countries that are exploring new technology instead of just saying, look, let's go with what we got. We got oil, and two things with the oil. A, they make lots of money, but B, there's a reason that the U.S. has all of these bases concentrated in the Middle East. They can control the area where the oil comes from, control the shipping lanes and who can get the oil. And it's not about climate change with them. It's not about oil with them. It's about another tool for hegemonic power. And whereas Russia and China and some of these other countries, it really is a lot about power for them. So they're not seeking this tool to keep hegemonic power. So they can say, well, maybe we can put a charging station in space and send it down, and then we can have free energy. Once we build the charging space, all we got to do is maintain the infrastructure of the satellites or whatever that creates it. At any rate, your thoughts on that, Caleb?
Sure. Well, I think a great example of what you're describing is take the top oil exporting country in Africa right now. That's Nigeria. Nigeria is exporting the top amount of oil from of any African country. And take a look at the conditions in Nigeria. Pull up the CIA World Factbook and look at the data there. Life expectancy is very low. I think it's in the 40s or the 50s. Literacy in the country is very, very low. The people there are supplying more oil on the international markets than anywhere else, but the country is deeply, deeply poor because that oil is run by BP, Shell, Chevron, and ExxonMobil. And I mean, look at the conditions at the area in Nigeria that's exporting this oil is the Niger Delta region. Look at the conditions people live in the Niger Delta region. I mean, it's a very, very rich country where the people are in poverty. But what used to be the top oil exporting country in Libya, or what used to be the top oil exporting country in Africa was Libya. And when Libya was the top oil exporting country with their socialist economic system, they had the highest life expectancy on the African continent. They had wiped out illiteracy. They had built the world's largest irrigation system, the Great Man-Made River. People from all over Africa were trying to get into Libya to get jobs and get access to that oil wealth because they controlled their own natural resources. Their oil was under the control of the socialist government, and Gaddafi was using it to build up a strong economy. And Libyans lived very well with control of their own natural resources, whereas, the control of Nigeria's oil by Western corporations has led to the country being impoverished. Another great example would be look at Angola. Angola, they had, 2000, until 2002, they were basically facing civil war from the time they got their independence from 1975 up till 2002. The USA was arming extremists and there was a civil war going on there. But in 2002, when they had peace in Angola for the first time, the slogan was Angola starts now, and they had some of the highest rates of economic growth in the world. It was just a boom that was happening under the leadership of the socialist government of the MPLA, and they built, the capital Luanda was just built up amazingly. Huge amounts of economic growth were taking place. I mean, China was going in there and building highways and bridges, and it was really, really amazing what was happening because they controlled their own natural resources. So if you can compare socialistic development where people have control of their own economies and countries control their own resources, et cetera, if you can compare that with the export of capital, which Lenin said was an aspect of imperialism, it's night and day. When countries are dominated by these big international cartels, they get ground further into poverty. But when countries take control of their own resources and their own economy, they can start building and raising people up. And I mean, you can see great examples of that all across the planet.
We've got we're over, but let's take about another 5 minutes.
Sure.
Because I want to ask you about the U.S. government and your thoughts on it. My thoughts are, people talk about the U.S. is protecting democracy or standing for democracy, et cetera. I don't think there's any parts of democracy left in the U.S. right now. I feel as though we are, you can use the word, one of the words, kakistocracy, where the least knowledgeable and the most corrupt run a country. Well, that's certainly, in my opinion, part when you look at a Kamala Harris and a Joe Biden. But I do want to ask you about this, because you wrote a book on Kamala Harris. And as bad as things are, I was in law enforcement for years. I retired. And when I ran our academy, I used to always tell the students, there's no situation so bad that a police officer can't make it worse. And one of the things that needless to say, I was the lefty in police in a career with a lot of conservatives, but I got along well with the people because I respected people, But at any rate, my point being this: as bad as things are right now, I think to myself, my God, if something happened to Joe Biden, as horrible as he is, Kamala, it's like, what else could go worse? Oh no, Joe Biden crapped out and Kamala Harris is in power. Your thought in power, she wouldn't be in power. She would be a conduit for power. She would be a figurehead for power. But I want you to take the last 5 minutes to tell us what you think about Kamala Harris and what we should know. You wrote a book on it. What's the name of your book? Where can people find it, and et cetera?
My book is available everywhere books are sold. Kamala Harris and the Future of America, an essay in 3 parts. I got into who she is, and it's really bizarre because nobody wants to talk about her. No one really wants to talk about her roots and who she is. Kamala Harris was the California State Attorney General. She was the Bay Area District Attorney, and she was a vicious prosecutor. She was a lock 'em up prosecutor. She destroyed all kinds of people's lives, and for smoking marijuana. And then she joked about the fact that she claims to herself have smoked marijuana. She joked about that on a radio program when she was running for vice president. If you look into the details, the California State Attorney General's office was constantly being castigated by judges for withholding evidence. There were drug labs that were giving false positive results where, someone would test and it would say positive and they weren't actually positive. And the prosecutors never handed this information over to the defense. There were people that could have not gone to jail if they had known that these labs were giving false positive results. There was an instance where there was someone who was on death row facing execution. And Kamala Harris really just wanted to fry a bastard, as they say. And so she wanted to block DNA evidence from being admitted. And she was overruled by the governor, and they did get DNA evidence, and the execution was halted. But can you imagine that? Someone's about to be executed, and she says, no, we don't need any DNA to find out if they're innocent or guilty. That's horrific. And she told the New York Times she feels very bad about that. Oh, that's great. Attempted murder. She feels bad about it. Okay. I mean, look into the details, but you have to ask yourself, and I dig into her roots and her character, and her psychological profile, and how is she capable of doing this? Because now she's tried to reinvent herself. She's completely woke, and she's Black Lives Matter, and she's all of this. How did she go from vicious prosecutor to this, and what's really going on there? The more you get into it, her father, was a Marxist economist, Marxian, kind of a Bernie Sanders guy. He was an advisor to the government of Michael Manley in Jamaica. He taught at Stanford for a long time. And the two of them do not get along. Her father basically denounced her presidential campaign and called it a travesty of identity politics. He has not attended. He did not attend her inauguration as vice president. She never talks about her father. The two of them are at odds. And you look into the details, it's very clear that Kamala Harris considers herself to be a victim. She feels that she's been victimized. The world has been unfair to her. And that then gives her the license to harm other people. And that gives her the ability to basically do whatever is necessary to, get ahead in the world and harm other people in the process. And you look into that, it's very, very dangerous. There are people around Kamala Harris who know how to push her buttons and know how to manipulate her and get her to do things that she might not otherwise do. And that seems to be the situation. We have someone there. I mean, listen to her latest analysis of Ukraine. Russia is a big country. Ukraine is a small country. Russia is attacking the small country. There's a lot more to it than that. There's, the USA piling weapons in there, NATO, but that's all she knows. That's how deep her analysis is. But there are people around her who are very smart and know how to manipulate her. And in that book, I talk about the Hillary Clinton State Department and how Barack Obama basically didn't know what was going on. Hillary Clinton was maneuvering around the Obama administration to set up things like the intervention in Libya, to set up things like the U.S. intervention in Syria and the coup in Honduras in 2009. And it was very clear that Obama didn't know what was going on, but the Hillary Clinton State Department was maneuvering behind his back. And there were instances where Obama would get up and he hadn't been briefed by them. He didn't know the United States was planning this coup in Honduras. And if you look at the details, you study the people who are in power, that's important. But the people around them, in the Obama White House, you had Ben Rhodes, you had Samantha Power, you had Cass Sunstein. Those people are much more key in understanding who really has the power. It's those whispering into the ear of the throne who kind of manipulatively, cast and direct those in power. They are very, very key and important. And if you look at it, Kamala Harris is being handled. She has people who know how to play her like a violin. And they are able to manipulate her. And yes, she's a very, very dangerous figure. So I hope people will read my book and learn about where she came from and what we can learn from this. As those of us who are progressive and leftist and want to change the world, we ought to learn from this. How did she grow up as a socialist and, spend her childhood as a community activist and such, grow up to be this vicious prosecutor and now the vice president of American imperialism? How did our movement produce somebody like this who seems to be without any moral compass? How did this happen? Well, if you read my book, you can find out about it and what we can really learn from it about about trying to figure out how we can build a progressive and anti-imperialist movement in the United States.
I'm going to give you a perspective that I haven't heard on her statement about big countries and little countries, right? Because they asked her what's going on, and she was on it was a Black podcast, right, or whatever it was, or radio show. And I tell you the way it came across to me, quite frankly, elitist and racist. This is the way it came across. When you're talking to a little kid, you have to dumb it down. So the kid says, "What's going on?" Well, the big animal over there has to eat, because they're like, "Hey, mom, daddy, why'd the coyote just eat that rabbit?" Well, little Joey, he's a big animal and he has to eat, and that's a little teeny animal, and in nature those kind of things happen. And you explain, right? Okay, Kamala, what's going on? Well, little Black people who are watching this show, there's a big mean country over here. It's Vladimir Putin. And there's a little teeny innocent country, and it's Ukraine. The big country. You ever played that game called Pac-Man? Wow, wow, wow. That's the way it really came across to me. And that it was very elitist, and that she was basically very elitist, racist, whatever you want to call it, that she had no respect for the people who are watching that. She's a lawyer. She's not, she's horrible when it comes to speaking, but she's not stupid. She didn't get through law school being stupid, and a lawyer knows how to explain things. So it came across to me, you can call it racist, you can call it elitist, you can call it whatever it is, but you know how the elitists are. They really do believe that we're stupid. They really do believe that they're intellectually superior to us. And when they have to explain things to it, they have to put it in words that our poor little tiny little intellects can absorb. What do you think about that perspective?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. And that reminds me of what I referenced before when she was on The Breakfast Club, this radio program, and they asked her if she'd ever smoked weed. And she said, "Half my family's from Jamaica. What do you think?" And that remark got under her father's skin like you wouldn't believe. And that her father actually wrote this essay. It's very hard to find. You have to kind of dig it up. It's been taken off the web, but I dug it up for the book. And he wrote this essay, and he gave this interview. He said, the stereotype of a Jamaican as a joy-seeking, pot smoker or something like that is something he very much resents. His whole family in Jamaica were very offended by that comment. But in particular, if you look at the essay that he wrote, Reflections of a Jamaican Father, it gets even deeper, because there was a custody battle in which the stereotype of Jamaicans as pot smoking and bad fathers and stuff was basically used to prevent him from having the ability to raise his own daughters, Kamala and her younger sister. The idea that he was not a good father because he was from Jamaica and such, and the stereotype was used, and it was very, very personal there. So you look into the details. It's very, very interesting, and it's very weird. When Barack Obama was running for president, we learned everything. He went to a Muslim school in Indonesia, and his pastor was Jeremiah Wright, who said this one time, and his mother was Ann Dunham, and she did this and she did that, and it was like we heard every detail about Barack Obama's life. Kamala Harris, it's just like, there she is. She used to be a prosecutor. Now she's a senator from California. Isn't she awesome? Great. It's weird. Nobody wants to talk about her background. Her background just seems off limits by mainstream media. But yet everything I wrote that book before the election. It came out in September before the 2020 elections. Everything I wrote is being proven true. Her staff are resigning. Simone Sanders and others have stepped down and said she is a sadistic narcissist, just like I wrote about. She subjects her staff to this heart-wrenching criticism. She refuses to prep for interviews, because why would she need that? She's the great Kamala Harris. She must know it all anyway. Everything I'm saying is coming absolutely true. Her staff are quitting because in D.C., if you work for her, you're known as a Harris person. And even the Biden folks can't stand the Harris people, the people that work for her, because, she cultivates this atmosphere in her office that is just intolerable. Everything that I pointed out about her personality and all that is proving itself to be very, very accurate. So there you go.
Well, Caleb, I want to thank you for taking your time out on a Saturday morning with us. Where can people find your information and more about your work?
Well, I'm on YouTube. I'm Caleb Maupin, CalebMaupin. I guess my name is right down here, so you can just check out my name right there. I didn't need to spell it for you, but there you go. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Rockfin. I'm trying to get on more apps. I'm on Odyssey because I figure my time on YouTube may be limited.
Same here.
But yeah, I'm everywhere. You can find me on social media. I've got a website, calebmaupin.com. I'm with the Center for Political Innovation. That's a think tank that I'm directing, cpiusa.org.
All right. Thanks a lot, Caleb. And I want to thank everyone. All right, Caleb. Well, I will talk to you soon and hope to get you back on. I'm going to be trying to do this on Saturday mornings and hope to get you on again sometime.
Sure thing.
All right. Thanks a lot. Well, I want to thank everybody for taking some time out. We had Ray Mcgovern, we had Netfa Freeman. We had a really good show, I think, today. I really enjoyed it. I'm going to end up with a few comments of my own. And that is, I think that what I'm trying to do here is to provide a bottom line, alternative perspectives. That's what we need. You know, I'd say now I turn on the mainstream media because I want to know what the government wants me to think. And when I go to alternative media, you know, we have an opportunity to compare. I'm not saying that the people that I had on today were right or wrong. I'm saying you get a different perspective and it allows you to compare. And then, oh my gosh, something that we're not allowed to do, something that we're not supposed to do your own research and to compare what you're learning in the mainstream media, what you see from my little podcast or whatever they are, what you hear from Ray Mcgovern, former CIA analyst, a guy who literally prepared the daily briefing and presented it to the president of the United States for decades, from JFK to Reagan to George H.W. Bush, you know, to Netfa Freeman, a brilliant guy who does tremendous work around the world. So every day, and I hear people, I've had people complain, well, Garland, you never bring on anyone, or you never deal with like the mainstream. And here's what I say: we're inundated with that. We're inundated with that. You can't, everywhere you walk around, it's breathing. When you talk to your friends, I don't know about you, I have friends and I say, what do you think? And they regurgitate the propaganda that they've heard every day on Fox, CNN, and MSNBC. And I know propaganda works because people say things to me that they heard in the mainstream media and they think it's their idea. They truly believe it's their idea. That's when propaganda is really working. And if we look, as an example, to end up with Ukraine, and this is why the work we're doing is important. In Ukraine, one of the first things that happened when Vladimir Zelensky became president is he started shutting down the opposition media. He shut down the TV stations. He shut down the radio stations. He shut down the newspapers of the opposition. Why is that? You don't have to do that if you're telling the truth. You don't have to do that if you're genuine. And might I add, it was applauded by the U.S. State Department and by the neocons in Europe. They didn't say we're all for freedom. So we should have known that if they were applauding that to happen in Ukraine, that it was just a matter of time before it happens here. So, you know, thanks everyone, Reckless Abandon and being here, and Chicken Patty and Two Bunnies too, and T Terry, and all the people who've taken time out of their Saturday morning. I would appreciate it if you would at Garland Nixon, if you would follow me on Twitter. Oh, wait a minute here. Let me do this before I leave. I can't have just Caleb Maupin there when I'm still alive. How about this? There we go. I would appreciate it if you would share this on all your social media platforms, like, share, and subscribe. And let me add this: if you're watching this on Twitter, go to YouTube. And if you don't watch it again, I'm not asking you have to watch it again, but at least subscribe to my channel and give me a thumbs up, because that helps. I know we're being suppressed. And enjoy the rest of your day. It's a beautiful day. I'm going to go. Believe it or not, I have a juicer. I'm a person that's big on natural health. I do a lot of herbal things, stuff like that. So I'm going to juice like carrots and beets and all that kind of stuff and enjoy a healthy juice. I'm going to eat a big bowl of oatmeal with bananas and cinnamon and stuff like that. I try to take care of myself, look out for myself, and keep my my natural immunity as strong as I can. So thank you very much. And I advise you to do the same. Enjoy the rest of your day. Oh, and I'm going to go ride my bicycle. How's that? You know, from the looks of things and the price of gas, we'll all be riding our bicycles soon. We'll be having like a basket on the back, so where it'll be like some of the Asian countries, some of the countries you go to where you see everybody riding around on a bicycle. Well, we're heading in that direction, because I don't know if you know this, the price of oil per barrel has actually gone down in the past few days, but the price of gas didn't go down, which simply means they got the numbers up, they're making more money, and they're going to keep on making that money. That's what it's all about. I want to thank everybody for taking the time out here once again, and like, share, subscribe. Peace. I'm out.